Chapter 481 First Meeting. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. What is she doing here? Why is she talking to me? I am not staring at anything. And who are you calling a brat, you brat? Respect your elders. The girl scoffed. What elders? You're obviously younger than me. Sonny opened his eyes wide in outrage. Ouch. He knew that he looked younger than his age, but to be mistaken for a middle schooler, that was just too much. It was getting dark, so maybe that was the reason for her mistake. Rain, meanwhile, was not done speaking. And you were definitely staring at me, with a very nasty expression. I almost tripped. Didn't your parents teach you not to stare? Sonny opened his mouth, then closed it again. Then opened it once more. First of all, I am 18. Second, I was just zoning out and thinking about stuff, adult stuff that a youngster like you would not even understand. And lastly, my parents taught me all they needed to teach me, but what do they have to do with any of this? They're not here. Rain mockingly raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah. You live in this big house all alone. Sonny furrowed his brow. Not only do I live in this house alone, I also own it. But right at that moment, Effie suddenly shouted from inside. Sonny. Come eat, dinner is getting cold. He froze, then felt the tips of his ears growing hot. Damn it, Effie. That's a guest of mine. She's staying over, for reasons. Rain stared at him for a few moments with a funny expression on her face, then asked. Your name is Sonny. Sonny shrugged, trying to appear as indifferent as possible. Sure. Why? She suddenly laughed. What's so funny? No. It's just, my mom calls me Rainy. What a coincidence. He relaxed. Oh, for a moment, I was afraid that she remembers me. But it doesn't seem that way. Good. That is good. Was he a little bit disappointed? Sonny took out his communicator, pressed a button on it, and threw an etched chip that slid from the slick device to Rain. She was in process of asking another question. Oh, and by the way, I often see you meandering on the porch and skipping school, are you a delinquent or WH? Then, she caught the chip and stared at it in confusion. What's this? Sonny smiled with a corner of his mouth. Can't you see? That's a government-issued citizenship chip. Now how would I have one if I wasn't of legal age? Rain looked at the chip, then grew even paler than usual. You really are 18. She was so mortified that she even used the proper honorifics. Sonny laughed. Of course I am. As a respectable adult, I never lie. I am the most honest person in the world, really. The girl seemed like she was currently wishing to sink into the earth. Oh. I am so sorry, then. I didn't think. As a child that grew up in a good family, she was most likely taught to be very polite to elders, so this situation was more or less a nightmare. Sonny himself had never associated with types of people who were particular about etiquette, but from what he had seen in Rain's school, among her ilk, social hierarchy and proper rituals were all the rage. Luckily, Effie decided to appear at that very moment to put an end to the awkward situation. Opening the door, she rolled her wheelchair onto the porch while saying angrily. Listen, doofus, are you going to eat or not? Because if not, I'll eat your portion too, you know. Then, she stopped and stared at Rain, then at Sonny. After a few moments, she asked. Who's your friend? Sonny rubbed his face. Eat as much as you want. And this girl lives in the neighborhood. She was just passing by. Rain nodded. Nice to meet you, ma'am. I am very sorry. I was just on my way home from school, and made a mistake. You see, what has happened. Effie grinned, then gestured for her to stop talking. Let me guess, This one right here was zoning out with a nasty expression on his face, and then looked at you and said something wildly inappropriate. Rain blinked a couple of times, then said. Yes. I mean, no, he didn't say anything. It was me, I said something inappropriate. The former huntress shook her head. Then you're lucky. Sonny here is a bit special. One of a kind. The things that sometimes come out of his mouth. Sonny stared at her in outrage and hissed. The things that come out of my mouth. You're the one to talk. She sighed, then looked at Rain with a hurt expression on her face. You see how he bullies me. Ah, that's no way to treat a guest, Sonny. So ungracious. What will this nice neighborhood kid even think? Rain energetically shook her head. No, no. I won't think anything. I have to go home, actually. It's been nice meeting you. With that, she hurriedly turned around and made a step to walk away. Effie raised her voice a little. Bye. Nice meeting you, too. If you feel guilty about the misunderstanding, you can stop by any time. With food. All will be forgiven. Sonny stared at her with wide eyes, not quite believing what he was hearing. Finally, when Rain's figure disappeared behind the green fence, Effie turned to him and smiled. It's almost like there's a factory somewhere in the city releasing whole batches of tiny, pale, bony teenagers. That girl is almost as pale as you, Sonny. I can't believe it. With that, she shook her head, turned her wheelchair, and went back inside to continue her dinner. Leaving Sonny alone, flabbergasted and trying to determine if he was currently awake. What was that? What just happened? Of all the countless scenarios he had in his head of how his first meeting with Rain would go, this was definitely not one of them. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 482 Peace offering. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sonny was too shaken by what had just happened to do anything else today. So, he just went down to the basement, entered the dream realm, and remained in his small room in the sanctuary instead of going out to fight nightmare creatures. There, he just slept peacefully for the entire night. This was a very strange way to act for Sonny, but many awakened did just that every day. Unless their citadel was under attack, which happened frequently in most parts of the dream realm, or they were assigned a certain duty, people just remained in their quarters, slept, and returned to the real world without throwing themselves into any kind of danger. Others performed various tasks to earn a livelihood in the citadel, all the while staying safe behind its walls. Few frequently ventured outside and challenged the wilderness of the dream realm. And who could blame them? Most people were made awakened against their will, after all. It was the spell that wanted humans to risk their lives, go through deadly trials and endure terrible suffering, not people themselves. So there was nothing wrong with a person who wanted to stay as safe as possible, for as long as possible. If anything, it was Sonny who behaved abnormally. In any case, he felt refreshed and more balanced when he returned to the real world in the morning. A good night of sleep helped him put his unexpected encounter with Rain in perspective. Yes, it was an unfortunate mistake on his part, and yes, the fact that she now knew his face and name was less than ideal. But truly, nothing too bad had happened. Rain just thought of him as a neighbor. Not even an acquaintance, just a stranger. Which was just as Sonny wanted it. To be on the safe side, he could avoid leaving the house for a while, altogether. And yet, in the evening, he found himself sitting on the porch again, enjoying the view and a cup of tea, as he had already grown used to. After yesterday, I doubt that she'll ever want to approach this house again. So I should be all right. But as it turned out, he was not. Sonny noticed Rain walking from the public transport terminal long before she came anywhere near his home, because one of his shadows was stationed further down the street to keep a lookout. He sighed, then lowered his eyes and pretended to study the synthwood surface of the porch, hoping to avoid making eye contact with the teenage girl. This time, he was not going to give her a reason to come closer and talk to him. However, it was all for naught. When Rain approached the path leading to his door, she slowed down a bit, hesitated, then turned and walked directly to him. What the hell? Sunny raised his head and stared at her with a bit of surprise. Hi. It's you again. She nodded, then took off her backpack and produced a big food container out of it, seemingly full of something delicious. Then, Rain handed it to Sunny. Here. My mom made it. Your friend said to bring food, right? Oh, and I'm really sorry. For, yesterday. Sunny blinked a couple of times, then took the container from her hands and stared at it for a bit. Damn Effie, who told her to ask for food? I cook great food for the both of us myself. Then, he pretended to smile and said. Yeah, she did. And no problem. Say thanks to your mom. Sunny thought that the conversation would be over after that, but Rain lingered. There was a sort of curious expression on her face. It's nothing much, just some pasta with mushrooms and cream sauce. My favorite. Sunny, right. I'm Rain, by the way. He looked at the food container again, re-evaluating his stance on its existence. Nothing special, he was willing to bet that the ingredients she listed were all natural, too. A far cry from synth-paced people like him usually consumed to keep their bellies full in the outskirts. Sunny knew a few guys who would kill to eat something like this. His smile became more genuine. Yup, I'm Sunny. Nice to meet you, Rain. She smiled slightly, hesitated for a few moments, and then asked. So you're really 18? And live alone in your own house? I mean, with that nice friend of yours? Sunny shrugged. Sure. She's just staying over until she finds a place of her own, though. Why? The girl looked at him with wide eyes. I mean, aren't you a bit young to live on your own? Aren't your parents worried? He stared at her for a couple of seconds, then tilted his head a little. I think that I'm of a perfect age to live on my own. And no, my parents aren't worried about me one bit. Rain smiled, as though hearing the most fascinating thing ever. But, who cooks your food? No, wait, who buys your wood? Do you get an allowance? Or do you have a stipend from your university? Wait, do you even go to a university? I have so many questions. Sunny mentally groaned. Questions. I hate questions. Outwardly, though, he remained calm. What kind of questions are those? Obviously, I buy and cook my food myself. And who needs a university? A stipend. I am a wildly successful young entrepreneur, if you must know. Basically, I do whatever I want. Rain stared at him. And your parent just let you? They're not lecturing you every day about the future, the importance of having a productive career, and how you must be always ready in case you get infected by the spell. Sunny furrowed his brow. No, none of those. Rain looked at him with envy and sighed. You're lucky. My mom and dad are like hawks. What the hell is a hawk? Something bad, I presume. He remained silent for a while, a complicated expression appearing on his face. Finally, Sunny said. Don't be hard on your mom and dad. You're the lucky one, really. I sort of twisted the truth a little. My parents don't care about where I am and what I do, because I don't have parents. So. I would rather be in your situation than mine, great as it is. Yours is a bit greater. Rain stopped smiling and looked at him with a hard read, sad expression on her pale face. Then, she said quietly. Oh. I see. Sorry. I didn't know. She smiled a little and waved. Well, I'll be going then. Enjoy the pasta, Sunny. The young girl put her backpack back on, turned around, and left. Sunny remained on the porch for a while, staring at the tray of food. Slowly, a dark expression settled on his face. I can't continue doing nothing anymore. I need to make a decision and proceed. I wasted too much time as it is, already. He avoided doing anything about getting Rain ready for the possibility of becoming infected by the spell, because he didn't know what to do, and how. But this inaction had to stop. He had to come up with something. Chapter 483 200 seconds. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The problem was, he just didn't know enough to make a good decision. And even then, was he even qualified to make it? Sunny had a lot of experience dealing with various situations, possessed a quick wit, and was street smart, as well as having a real talent for killing things and remaining alive. Without wasting time on false modesty, he could admit that he excelled at many things. But were the things he excelled at even applicable to training a young girl for the nightmare spell? After all, what he wanted to give her were not combat skills or survival tactics, though she was being taught already, in an elite school that someone like him would have never been able to attend. What he wanted to give her was a mindset that would allow her to survive in the unforgiving hell of the dream realm. And mind was a delicate thing. If he went about it in the wrong way, he could bring more harm than good. Not to mention that everyone was different, and what worked for him was not guaranteed to work for someone else. Take his own friends, for example, all of them had wildly diverging mindsets, but each had been able to thrive even in a place as dire and harrowing as the Forgotten Shore. So, what the hell do I do? Sunny massaged his temples, then sighed. First, he had to observe more and understand more. Whatever he wanted to decide, it was stupid to try and base that decision on observing Rain for a single day as she went about her classes. Maybe I'll get inspired. Or my intuition will give me a hint. With that thought, he frowned, finished his tea, and went inside. The next morning, Sunny left his house early and used the transit system to reach the district where Rain's school was located. Now that he knew the place, he didn't need to follow his sister around. Instead, he went ahead, returned to the cafe he had hidden in the last time, and sent one of his shadows to keep watch on the entrance of the school as it waited for the young girl to appear. Half an hour later, he noticed her figure and silently ordered the shadow to follow Rain inside. I am going to have to keep studying her demeanor for a while, a few weeks, at least. By then, it is going to be clear if my initial impression was right, or if I need to reconsider my evaluation. I'll also understand her strengths and weaknesses much better. Sunny had to stop himself from groaning. A few weeks, that was going to really eat into his time. Both the hunt for shadow fragments and his training with Effie and Saint were going to suffer. Which was such a shame. Recently, he was starting to feel a hint of confidence when handling the cruel sight in its spear form. Previously, Sunny had mistakenly considered the spear to be a rather static weapon, one mostly capable of only straightforward thrusting attacks. And on the surface, it was, more than that, this was actually one of its best features. Anyone could use a spear with a decent level of effectiveness. That was why it ruled the battlefield for thousands of years. Unlike the sword, a person didn't need endless hours of practice to become a proficient amateur with it. But in the hands of a master, the spear was a completely different beast. It was swift, deadly, and unpredictable, capable of a vast variety of attacks at a wide array of ranges. It was a truly versatile weapon capable of dealing devastating damage to anyone who would dare to approach its wielder. What Sunny liked the most, though, was how deceiving a spear could be. Cruel Sight, in particular, was especially flexible due to its long blade, which could both piece and slash. Not to mention the fact that the length of its shaft could be changed at will. Sunny was still much more comfortable with swords, though. Especially familiar ones, like the Midnight Shard of the Great Odachi form of the Soul Serpent. He was growing rather fond of the ability to keep his enemies further away from his body that the Cruel Sight gave him, nevertheless. So it was a real shame that he was going to have to reduce the amount of time he trained by a lot. That was not even the main reason why he felt malcontent about the prospect of spending weeks observing Rain at school, though. The main reason was, teenagers. Sunny clearly remembered the mental trauma he had experienced after being forced to watch the young elites attending the prestigious school making life difficult for both themselves and the teachers. Even after having to fall into an endless abyss while eating the rotten meat of a devil and burning in the ocean of divine flames, he would rather repeat the whole thing than experience school life again. Well, almost. Not really. With a sigh, Sunny concentrated on the pastry in front of him and prepared for a long and arduous day. That pastry alone made his mood better, simply because of the fact that it didn't come from a mimic. The young elites were the same, venomous, incredibly misguided, and infuriating. Luckily, Rain was also the same. She studied quietly and avoided all the drama, which basically made her a pariah. Good girl, Rain, that's right, disregard all the nonsense and learn as much as you can. Knowledge is a privilege. These classmates of yours are too stupid to value it, but you're not. Well, it wasn't as though they were some delinquents, either. Academic achievement was the cornerstone of the social hierarchy in this elite school, so the competition among the students was fierce. It was just that most saw learning as a tool to earn status, as opposed to the goal. Not that their priorities were any of Sunny's business. Hour went after hour, and at some point, he decided to leave the cafe and take a walk to chase away the boredom. But before he could, however, something happened. His communicator suddenly let out a grating, echoing ringing sound. A second later, the sound repeated. And it wasn't only just him. Every person in the cafe, from the clients to the members of the staff, was receiving the same notification. Sunny's chest grew cold. He knew that sound, of course. Everyone in the world knew and dreaded it. Looking down, he saw the familiar text appear on the screen of his communicator. No, the notification read. Emergency alert, gate activity detected in your proximity ETA. 201 seconds, evacuate immediately. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 484. The Gate. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A gate, there is a gate. Before Sunny even comprehended these words, he was trembling, cold fear rising from the depths of his heart to swallow him whole. This was not a conscious response, but an instinctual reaction, something that his body had learned to do in the past, the terror that all modern humans came to bear in their very bones. The grating, echoing ringing meant only one thing: run. Run if you wish to live, if you don't want to die in a manner so harrowing that words could not describe it. But Sunny wasn't a mundane human anymore. Strangling the instinctual fear, he threw it aside and stared at the screen of the communicator with a dark expression on his face. The notification was similar to the ones he had seen several times in the past. Previously, when he lived in the outskirts, he had learned of the devastation an opening gate could bring firsthand. Wherever you lived, you were bound to hear that sound once every few years. Granted, the infrastructure in the outskirts was way less developed than in the proper parts of the city, and there wasn't a lot of awakened around. So the results were often more disastrous. He was in a very respectable district right now. But ironically, things were much worse. Sunny wasn't very versed in the technology the government used to detect the appearing gates in advance, but he knew that it failed this time. Usually, people would receive a notification at least 10 minutes, half an hour, sometimes even days before the dreaded event. This gave most of them time to evacuate out of the impact zone, and also allowed the government forces to arrive before the flood of nightmare creatures broke free of the opening gate and cut through the ranks of the nearby awakened who tried to stall it. 200 seconds, that was nothing. Less than nothing. It was not nearly enough time for people to run, and not nearly enough for help to arrive. Such a small time window meant only one thing. That unless something happened, there was going to be a massacre. He was safe, though. He could just shadow step away at any moment. As people jumped to their feet and ran to the exit with panicked expressions, Sunny sighed and pressed on the notification. Immediately, a map opened up, showing him the location of where the gate was going to appear, as well as optimal evacuation routes. Too close. There was no way that Rain's school was going to be able to evacuate thousands of students in time. If their hazard protocols were well established, they were not even going to try. They would just gather the children in the most protected part of the school, activate their defense systems, and try to hold until help arrived. The school was in the direct vicinity of the opening gate, though. Sunny wasn't sure how well its defenses would do, no matter how formidable they were. Even if there were several awakened staffed as security personnel or instructors for this exact eventuality, they wouldn't be able to do much. The true elites would not take such positions, after all. What to do? This time, the notification interface was different from how Sunny had seen it in the past. There was an additional, urgently blinking symbol on the map. It was very similar to the insignia Master Jet wore on her sleeve, only this one had 2 stars on it instead of 3. This symbol was there because the communicator knew that Sunny was an awakened. There were 190.2 seconds remaining until the gate opened. Out in the classroom where one of his shadows was currently hiding, the children and the teacher were still staring at the notification with stunned expressions, not yet comprehending what it meant exactly. Or simply refusing to. Not paying a lot of attention to the chaos happening around him, Sunny pressed on the symbol, and additional information appeared on the screen. Attention all awakened request immediate action attention all awakened request immediate. Below that, several lines of text shimmered. Gate category. 2, 89% probability, 3, 10% probability, higher, undefined. Strike Force ETA. 16 minutes, 14 seconds. 13 minutes. A corner of Sunny's twitched, a resentful grimace appearing on his face. The earliest any government force would be able to arrive to the gate was in 13 minutes after it had opened. 13 minutes, that might as well have been an eternity. Too long. And now, Sunny had to make a decision. He had to either run away or respond to the call to arms to stand in front of the Nightmare Gate, hoping to survive in the flood of monsters for 13 entire minutes. Well, it wasn't that hard of a decision, really. Sunny knew that he was going to stay, not out of any sort of moral obligation, but simply because he wanted to. He was equally as reluctant to turn tail and allow the spell to invade his world with impunity as he was to see countless nice, mundane humans die in the maws of nightmare creatures. Like the polite waitress who served him the delicious pastries, or the baker who had made them. This was his world, his city, and his fellow humans. Before, Sunny was always weak and had no choice but to run, hide, and tremble in fear. He was done living his life in fear a long time ago, though. He was also done allowing anyone, or anything, to take what was his without a bloody fight. He was done being weak. But even that wasn't the real reason. Perhaps Sunny would have considered the approaching disaster too much of a risk and retreated, but Rain was there, very near to the center of the map displaying the gate's impact zone. So really, running away wasn't even an option. 180 seconds remained. Now left alone in the empty cafe, Sunny stood up and stretched. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips. This is going to be a wild, wild ride. Chapter 485 Lesser Evil. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Now that he knew that he was insanity going to act, Sunny had to decide how exactly, and do it very fast. Sadly, the question was not as easy as it seemed. His life was too complicated for anything to be easy. Not only was the answer to the question not too obvious, but, what's worse, he had mere seconds to make a decision, which was not nearly enough to think things through with any sort of clarity. But what choice did he have? None at all. Sunny grimaced. Let's speedrun our options. The safest and most cowardly option was to shadow step into the classroom through the shadow spying on Rain, grab the girl, and bring her away. At least it seemed safe on the surface. In reality, though, such an action would cause all types of terrible consequences both for him and for his sister. Not only was he going to have a lot of explaining to do, revealing all the things he wanted to keep hidden, he would also leave countless witnesses, as well as digital evidence, connecting Rain to him and vice versa. In the future, whenever he was going to end up having really dangerous enemies, which Sunny had no doubt would happen one day, soon, that evidence was going to come to light and lead them to her. Which was not something he was willing to accept. So, he was going to leave that option as the last resort, and act on it only if the school's defenses were breached and Rain was in imminent danger. With that out of the way, there was only one path left, doing his civil duty and going directly to the gate, in hopes of stalling the tide of nightmare creatures long enough for the cavalry to arrive. Awakened who didn't work for the government were expected and encouraged, but not technically obligated to respond to a call like that. Many, maybe even most, did not, and chose to run instead. And who could blame them? Not everyone with an aspect was a combatant, and even those who had not become one voluntarily. Forcing these already traumatized people to go to their potential deaths under the threat of retribution if they refused was not something the government was eager to do. Or maybe, it simply couldn't. Forcing Awakened to do anything was a dangerous idea, since they could potentially topple the government if pushed too much. So, the government preferred to use a carrot instead of a stick when dealing with them. It was a delicate balance. Sunny wasn't sure that he was even going to see that carrot, though. Because he was facing a dilemma. Yes, he had decided to fight in front of the gate, but this could also be done in several ways. 2 ways, really. Sunny could go into battle as himself, or, as Mongrel, protecting his identity from the prying eyes, and himself from any attention. Using Weaver's mask was not without risk, as every time he did so without proper preparations could potentially leave behind context clues that would allow smart people to narrow down the list of suspects. But the alternative, right now, with not a lot of time to weigh all the pros and cons, Sunny felt that the alternative was worse. If he wanted to have a hope of surviving for 13 minutes, he was going to have to go all out, showcasing the full scope of his true powers. That meant that all his efforts to create an image of a talented, but not too dangerous or noteworthy young Awakened were going to be destroyed. He was going to become really, really famous, and draw the eyes of entities he wanted to remain blind to his existence for as long as possible. Perhaps even worse, he was going to create one too many coincidences for Rain to continue not noticing his secret attention. It was one thing to have a quirky neighbor, if he suddenly showed up near your school in your moment of need, and turned out to be one of the most deadly Awakened of his generation, though, that would most likely be enough to make her start asking questions that Sunny wasn't ready to answer. So, Awakened Sunless was going to have to cowardly run away from the gate, while Mongrel was going to have to stand and fight. What a messed up situation. 170 seconds remained. Sunny sighed, knowing full well that this decision was not ideal. At the minimum, Mongrel's persona prevented him from using some of his most powerful tools, anything that people knew and associated with Sunny, no less. Like the cruel sight. Very few people had seen him use Saint, however. In fact, outside of Neff's cohort, Mordred was pretty much the only person who had. There were also the people he had fought the Lord of the Dead with, but all of them were gone now, with one notable exception. Seishan was still alive and out there somewhere, in the embrace of one of the 3 great clans. So summoning Saint was not ideal, too. Even though someone else could have received a similar echo, revealing her was really risky. He could only do it if things got really desperate. Maybe I should reconsider. But there was no time to consider things anymore. There were less than 3 minutes left before the gate opened. He would just have to manage, somehow. Sunny closed his eyes for a moment, then checked where the cameras monitoring the cafe were located, and walked into their blind zone. There, he summoned the covetous coffer, placed his communicator on its lid, and sent the box scurrying in the direction opposite of where he himself was headed. After that, Sunny took a deep breath, and dissipated into the shadows. A few seconds later and hundreds of meters away, an armored figure wearing a fearsome black mask walked out of the darkness, the blade of the great Odachi resting on its shoulder. Mongrel had arrived to the Nightmare Gate. Chapter 486 Call of a Nightmare. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The road ahead of Sunny was almost empty. Only several people could still be seen, running away from the vertical line where the air was rippling strangely, 100 or so meters behind their backs. When they saw his menacing figure, the stragglers recoiled. Someone let out a frightened yelp. Not paying them any attention, Sunny calmly walked forward. The Soul Serpent rested on his shoulder. Strange. I have never seen an opening gate up close before. The deserted street in front of him did, indeed, look very eerie. Not only because it was almost entirely empty, both of pedestrians and of rushing PTVs, but also because light and shadows were behaving very strangely, the hue of the light slightly wrong, the movement of the shadows slightly erratic. The sound was strange, too. It was deadly quiet, but at the same time, Sunny couldn't get rid of the feeling that there were barely audible noises coming from all directions, assaulting his ears like an inaudible cacophony of muffled, distant, demented screams. There was a strange pressure rising in the air, getting stronger the closer he got to the nascent Nightmare Gate. The gate itself was easy to recognize. It looked like a tall vertical depression in the fabric of the world, a place where light refracted in unnatural ways and the inaudible screams were the loudest, not a rift in reality yet, but a hint of one. In front of the gate, half a dozen people stood, staring at it in tense silence. The awakened who, just like Sunny, decided to answer the call. Only 6 of them. While that fact didn't promise him anything good, it was to be expected. 200 seconds was just not enough for a lot of willing defenders to arrive. Even those who were ready to risk their lives in an attempt to protect the civilians needed time to get to the gate. After all, this bunch were those who had already been in the immediate impact zone when the alert was sent to their communicators, just like Sunny. Maybe they were overly confident in their abilities, or maybe, just like he, they had people they cared about in the surrounding area, perhaps even in the very same school where Rain was, a few hundred meters behind their backs. In any case, he couldn't help but feel a bit of respect toward these people. Coming to a gate already required a lot of courage, remaining even after it became clear that there were going to be less than 10 awakened fighting side by side to stall the tide of monsters was beyond that. These people were ready to die to fulfill their duty. Fools. Brave, brave fools. What about Sunny himself, then? I am a fool, too. But a cowardly one. Sunny had no plans of dying today. He knew what he was doing, and had ways to escape if things got too dire. Without slowing down even a little, he calmly walked past the 6 awakened and stopped with his back to them, closer to the gate than anyone else. Unwittingly, Sunny found himself standing at the head of the small group of defenders. Unlike them, he showed no sign of fear. The others were staring at the gate with pale faces, their bodies tense, their eyes full of unease and dark resentment. Sunny's pose, however, was confident, indifferent, almost relaxed. And in the eyes of the fearsome mask, there was nothing but darkness. The others reacted to his arrival with excitement. One more awakened to fight with them was already a good thing, but this one, in particular, looked especially imposing. His onyx armor and fearsome blade were obviously a cut above the memories they themselves had in their possession, and his calm demeanor suggested either an experienced fighter, or a madman. And then, someone recognized him. Wait, isn't that Mongrel? The others looked at the girl who spoke with confusion. Who? She stared at them with wide eyes. That's Lord Mongrel. Haven't you heard of him? A hint of recognition appeared in the eyes of the awakened gathered in front of the opening gate. One of them glanced at Sunny, lingered for a moment, and asked. I am sorry, friend. This young woman seems to have heard of you. If I may ask, are you an awakened of some renown? Sunny didn't move a muscle, and lied almost on autopilot. That I am not an awakened. I have no renown. The man raised an eyebrow. What do you mean, not an awakened? Then who are you? Sonny cursed inwardly. My damned tongue. He gritted his teeth, remained silent for a second, and then answered in a calm tone. I am just a human. Then, he sighed and turned his head slightly, staring at the six awakened. From the look of their memories and how they held themselves, they weren't elites. Several seemed to know how to hold a sword, but that was all. They were going to get eaten alive once the gate opened. Disheartened, he asked. Combat aspects. The defenders looked at each other, and then the girl who had recognized him answered. I have an awakened aspect that enhances my agility and allows me to strike with deadly precision. 2 guys have dormant aspects centered around endurance and strength, and the other 2 can perform ranged elemental attacks. So, 3 weak combat aspects, 2 supporting fighters, and no one capable of proper support or healing. He lowered his head for a moment. There were only 30 seconds left before the gate opened. Slight tremors were running through the ground beneath his feet, and bits of dust and small pieces of gravel were slowly rising into the air, levitating on the invisible currents of energy coursing through the air. How I am going to do this? Sonny gripped the hilt of the soul serpent tighter, then said hoarsely. Stay back, kill anything that gets past me. He paused for a moment, and then added. Make them bleed. The girl stared at him with wide eyes. Stay back. But, sir, you can't do it alone. There will be a horde of them. Even if there were 100 of you, that wouldn't be enough to kill them all. Sonny turned away and looked at the slowly opening rift in front of him. How could he get these people to stay out of his way? The best place for them to be was at the back, finishing off anything that Sonny failed to kill and preventing the nightmare creatures from escaping into the city. Escaping toward Rain's school. Failing to come up with a better lie, he opened his mouth and said coldly. One of me is enough to kill them all. With that, Sonny left the girl standing there with an open mouth, and walked forward. What's the big deal, anyway? It's just a nightmare gate. His legs, however, were trembling a little. Just at that moment, an especially strong tremor ran through the ground. The shadows exploded in a mad dance, the sunlight growing dim and ghostly. The wind howled through the empty street, as if the air was being sucked into the widening rift. And then, an invisible shockwave spread out of it, making the windows in the surrounding building shatter. Sonny resisted the push and suddenly felt the familiar feeling permeate his soul, the call of a nightmare. The gate had opened. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 487 First Wave. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Sonny took a step forward and brandished the soul serpent, feeling the indomitable nature of Saint's grounded battle style permeate his bones. The gloomy shadow wrapped itself around the blade of the Odachi, causing it to shine with dark radiance. Just like the taciturn demon, this serpent shared a kinship with the shadow, and as such, the augmentation it received was even more powerful than Sonny himself could enjoy. Even though the Odachi was only of the dormant rank, for now, this alone made it equal to an awakened blade in terms of sharpness, durability, and lethality. He activated the Living Stone and Feather of Truth enchantments of the onyx armor to make it light as a feather and able to heal the damage it was bound to receive. Then, Sonny summoned the Blood Blossom charm and willed the armor to integrate it, activating the Underworld Armament enchantment. This way, the enhancing effect the Crimson Flower had on his memories and shadows was going to be inherited by the mantle itself, and then strengthened even further. He had not told the other awakened to make the nightmare creatures bleed just to seem cool. He literally needed there to be as much blood flowing to the pavement as possible, so that his armor and sword became as powerful as possible. The gate was open now, revealing a dark rift in the fabric of reality, as wide as the street itself and as tall as the buildings. It seemed to devour all light around it, and call to him. Call for him to enter. Sunny wasn't too preoccupied with the gate itself, though. His gaze was locked on the unclear silhouettes moving through the darkness. Soon, the first nightmare creature burst into the daylight, leaving cracks on the asphalt with its black claws. Good. Had he not wanted to accumulate shadow fragments? Had he not wanted to raise the counter of the Prince of the Underworld enchantment? Well, he should have been careful about what he wished for. There were going to be hundreds of abominations coming through the rift today to satiate his wish. The second category gates were the most frequent to appear in the waking world. As such, everyone was familiar with how they functioned. The first few waves of advancing nightmare creatures were not going to be too terrible, at least for a fighter of Sunny's caliber. They would be comprised mostly of dormant creatures, with some awakened abominations mixed in. Their classes and numbers, too, would be comparatively low. But these first few waves, they were just a hint of the horror to come. Pretty soon, every nightmare creature coming from the gate was going to be of the awakened rank, with more and more fallen ones appearing as well. Their classes were going to rise, until there were as many demons as there were monsters and beasts around. And if Sunny was still alive by the time this second stage was nearing its culmination, well, two things could happen, neither promising him anything good. Either the gate was going to end up really being of the second category, or not. If it continued to grow, reaching the third category, then there would be more and more waves of nightmare creatures, hundreds of fallen abominations lunging into the real world from the dark void between worlds, with corrupted horrors and creatures of higher classes appearing among them. If it didn't, then, the guardian of the gate would manifest itself into reality. The guardian was always at least one rank higher than the gate's category, and could be of any high class, from a devil, to a dreaded titan. In any case, Sunny had to live through the initial waves first to find out what was going to kill him in the end. The first creature to appear from the darkness resembled a terrifying hound with blood-red bone spikes growing from its mottled, black fur. It landed on the road and opened its maw, then produced a guttural, hoarse roar. And then abruptly grew silent as Shadow Serpent's blade slashed across its neck, severing its head entirely. "You have slain a dormant beast." Sunny jumped back, and just as he did, more silhouettes lunged at him from the dark rift, their eyes burning with madness and bloodthirst as they smelled what was waiting for them up ahead. A whole world full of defenseless, untainted souls for them to devour. Not so fast, you filth. Sunny had a very simple plan. He was going to build a barrier in front of the gate. He was going to build a mountain of bleeding corpses right at the border of the darkness, to show the next waves of nightmare creatures how welcoming the real world was to their kind. As soon as more spiked hounds entered into the light, he lunged forward to meet them. Blood sprayed into the air, and as the menacing Odachi reaped another life, Sunny shifted his weight, slammed the pommel of the sword into the face of a lunging creature, then swiftly stepped forward and pierced the third one through the throat. Before the drops of blood even fell to the ground, he tore the blade from the corpse of the abomination, slicing it almost in half, and brought his heel on the skull of the beast he had previously slammed to the ground. In the process, he increased the weight of the mantle of the underworld, so the creature's head simply exploded under his boot. All of it took no more than 2 seconds. And on the third second, a dozen hellish beasts emerged from the rift, some of them running, some of them jumping high into the air to land on him from above. Behind them, a macabre wall of flesh, claws, and fangs was spilling out of the darkness like a rabid tide. Sunny growled, feeling the enchantment of the blood blossom activate and fill his sword with an unquenchable bloodlust. Come. Come, you bastards. Let this mongrel guide you all to hell. Chapter 488 A Beast More Terrible. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. No matter how fast Sunny was, how intricate his control of the shadow essence was, he had spent a whole month doing nothing but practicing it. After all, no matter how strong his body could become as the result, he still couldn't be in several places at the same time. Yes, he had 2 cores brimming with power, and his armor and his weapon were augmented by a combination of an aspect ability and enchantments. Killing one of the infernal hounds without receiving a hit was not that big of a problem, several, even. But a dozen. That was too much, even for him. So Sonny didn't even try. At this point, Mantle of the Underworld was as close to the pinnacle of the ascended rank as a memory could be, so these dormant beasts had no chance of piercing it with their fangs. He could allow himself to be bitten a few times. He just had to be strategic about it. He had to protect his neck and the back of his head, as well as pay attention to balance and mass. Yes, the abominations couldn't get to his flesh just yet, but an impact was still an impact. If he wasn't careful, the bastards were going to topple him, and once he was on the ground, the game would be over. Luckily, he had Feather of Truth at his disposal and could manipulate the weight of the onyx armor, turning it from incredibly light to as heavy as a mountain. In conjunction with the cautious use of Saint's grounded style, which excelled at solid footwork and indomitability, he could stay upright no matter how many beasts attacked him. Ignoring the creatures that were lunging at him from the ground, Sonny dashed to the side to avoid being landed on by one of the jumping hounds, and received another on the tip of the Odachi, allowing the momentum to impale it on the sword. Before the heavy carcass could weigh the shadow serpent down, Sonny used the long hilt as a lever and slammed the dead creature into the mass of its attacking kin. By that time, one jaw was already closing on his thigh, and another was centimeters away from his forearm. The blood-red fangs scraped against the stone-like metal of the onyx armor, not leaving even a scratch on it. Sonny let go of the hilt of the Odachi with one hand, then hooked its blade under the throat of one of the attacking abominations and made a simple move forward, slicing through tough fur, skin, and vulnerable flesh beneath. His other fist landed on the head of the second beast. Unseen to anyone, the moonlight shard appeared in it at the last moment, its ghostly blade easily piercing the creature's skull and disappearing as fast as it had appeared after destroying its brain. Sonny spun, throwing both corpses aside, caught the hilt of the Odachi with his second hand, made a small thrust to pierce a lunging hound's head right through one of its eyes, and then dashed forward to descend on the group of them entangled in the carcass of the abomination he had caught on the tip of his blade earlier. What happened next could only be described as a morbid, bloody dance. Sonny moved through the mass of nightmare creatures, much faster than any of them were, his great sword flying through them with graceful and fluid logic, sending more and more blood spraying into the air. Somehow, he managed to avoid most of their attacks, and those he did not ended up sliding fruitlessly from his armor. He almost made it look easy. But of course, it wasn't. Any of these beasts, even though they were only dormant, could massacre countless mundane humans, or kill a less skillful awakened in one fell lunge. It was just that today, they met a far more terrifying creature. A true awakened fighter. And a monstrous one, at that. Sonny cut through the mass of spiked hounds, strategically leaving many of them maimed, but alive. They could only bleed as long as they weren't dead, after all. And he needed them to bleed a lot to bring the blood blossom to the peak of its strength. There were many of them around him, too many, really. But that, too, could be used to his advantage. He used the corpses of the beasts he had slain, the ones he had left alive, and those who were yet to meet his blade as a barrier to slow down the others. Through superior speed and clever positioning, he was able to not only always remain moving, but also evade being surrounded. Things weren't exactly easy, but he was still managing without too much strain. His main problem right now was to not allow any of the abominations to move past him and escape into the streets. Luckily, the few that did manage to slip by were quickly finished by the 6 awakened staying behind, observing the massacre with grim, tense, and darkly odd expressions. However, Sonny wasn't oblivious to the fact that this successful start was an illusion. The first wave was just an appetizer, after all. Simply a hint of the true calamity to come. So, his goal, for now, was to kill as many of the dormant beasts as he could, bring the augmentation of the blood blossom to considerable strength, and throw as many corpses at the stretch of cracked asphalt directly in front of the gate as possible, to make it harder for the stronger abominations to enter into the real at full speed. He felt the dreaded change too soon, though. It came in a form of an eerie, long whistle that suddenly made the hounds lunge at him with renewed fury. And then, a crude arrow suddenly flashed out of the darkness of the rift, almost hitting him in the eye. The arrowhead, fashioned out of a splinter of a red bone, exploded against the wood of Weaver's mask, throwing his head back. What the? He swiftly repositioned and caught his balance, then dashed forward and skewered several beasts on the blade of the shadow serpent. More arrows flew out of the darkness, piercing the flesh of the attacking hounds or sliding off the onyx surface of the mantle of the underworld. He felt each hit, though. The power behind these arrows was truly monstrous. Awakened. Awakened creatures are coming. Already. As soon as he thought that, the first of the hunters came out of the darkness, following their hounds into the real world. Sonny gritted his teeth. A tall, desiccated humanoid with skin as black as coal and as rough as the bark of an ancient tree, wearing rotten remains of fur armor, raised a mighty bow made out of wood and bone, and looked at him with empty holes where his eyes should have been. Furious, red flames burned in their darkness instead. Crap. Sonny grabbed one of the hounds and hoisted its body up, just in time for the arrow to pierce its body instead of hitting him in the face. Bows, they're using bows. How was that even fair? Feeling the bloodlust of the blossom charms surge in his heart, Sonny threw the dying hound at the bone hunter, gripped his sword, and dashed forward once again. The novel will be updated first on this website. Come back and continue reading tomorrow, everyone. Chapter 489 Second Wave. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. There were several ancient archers aiming at him already, and more of the hunters were appearing from the darkness. Some wielded bows, some spears with jagged flint blades and crude axes. Those were awakened monsters, each and every one, equal in rank and class to Carapace centurions Sonny had fought once, a long time ago, on the Forgotten Shore. And to Sonny himself, technically, a much tougher enemy for him to slaughter. Luckily, unlike the massive centurions, the hunters weren't covered in adamantine chitin from head to toe. Ducking under the flying arrow, Sonny lunged forward and thrust the tip of the odachi into the desiccated flesh of one of the bowmen. The black, bark-like skin offered a lot of resistance to the shadow-honed blade, but the force of the blow was terrible enough to rip through flesh and bone, allowing it to pierce the body of the hunter and emerge from his back. Sonny just hoped that these bastards had anatomy similar to humans, and that their hearts were located in the same place. From the look of it, they were, however. The monster did not react to having his heart destroyed as a human would. Instead of dying, he simply grabbed the blade of the shadow serpent and took a step forward, skewering himself deeper onto it, in an attempt to reach Sonny with the other hand. Curses! Sonny twisted the blade, severing the monster's fingers, and then pulled the odachi upward, slicing through his ribcage, neck, and skull. This, finally, caused the bowman to die. You have slain an awakened monster, ancient Barrow Wraith. Revenants, great. Simply great, damn it. So he was fighting corpses that were possessed by some sort of a murderous spirit. As such, the hunters weren't fully sentient. That didn't stop them from remembering some of their craft, though. Not only were they able to wield their stone weapons with deadly skill, they also seemed to coordinate their attacks, hurting Sonny like prey. The archers moved apart so that he would have no choice but to show his back to one while attacking another. Those with melee weapons rushed forward, aiming to surround him. The situation was quickly turning desperate. Sonny gritted his teeth, dodged a strike of a stone axe, saw it shatter the asphalt into dust, and lashed out with the shadow serpent. Just a moment after the blade of the great odachi severed the attacker's legs, another arrow hit him in the shoulder, causing Sonny to stagger and almost lose his balance. He glanced around him, noticing that the enemies had succeeded in positioning themselves in a way that would have doomed a normal enemy. He was surrounded from all sides, with archers hiding behind mighty hunters wielding spears and axes. Damn it! I didn't want to do this. As a dozen arrows streaked through the air to bite at his armor, Sonny suddenly disappeared. A moment later, he appeared behind one of the archers and decapitated him with one terrible strike. Before others even had time to register what had happened, Sunny was inexplicably at the opposite side of their formation, his odachi piercing the head of another archer. Almost leaving afterimages behind, the figure of the warrior in the menacing onyx armor seemed to blink between half a dozen monsters in the span of a few seconds. Each time it appeared, one of the creatures died, their black bodies crumbling into piles of severed limbs and shattered skulls. The blade of the great odachi shone with dark radiance, cutting through the ancient hunters like a reaper's scythe. A few moments later, Sunny slid backward on the broken asphalt, leaving a bloody trail behind. A low growl escaped from beneath his mask. Enhanced by the underworld armament, the enchantment of the blood blossom was behaving strangely. It was supposed to augment his memories, echoes, and shadows, but with so much blood flowing to the ground, Sunny found that even his body and mind were being affected by the morbid charm a little. He felt both exhilarated and frustrated, exhilarated by the slaughter he was perpetrating, and frustrated because he needed, to kill more, cut more, make them bleed more, so much more. Blood. Blood. More. Sunny basked in the ecstasy of bloodshed for a split second, and then lashed out at himself, making the rabid thirst recede. He needed to be careful. This bloodlust was beneficial, but could easily blind him. He had to maintain clarity, that was the only way to control the flow of the battle and survive. Thankfully, he knew how to keep a cool head better than most. Regardless, although using shadow step so many times in rapid succession cost him a lot of shadow essence, he had managed to break the enemy formation and eliminate most of the archers. The rest were going to be much easier to deal with now. But of course, the gate was not done with him. It continued to spew more and more enemies, making any progress he had made meaningless. As a new wave of hunters emerged from the darkness, a frenzied mass of hounds rushing between the wraiths, he paled a little. Too many. No matter how superior his armor, weapon, and skill were, he was going to get buried under the tide of nightmare creatures due to their momentum. And even if he managed to cut a hole in the wall of abominations, the rest were going to move past him and descend upon the six awakened, and then, inevitably, escape into the streets of the city. Toward Rain's school. Damn. This is going to suck. As the new wave of creatures lunged forward, joining the survivors of the previous one, Sunny shifted his memories around. For a brief second, the broken oath took the place of the blood blossom, its soul-eroding aura being inherited and enhanced by the mantle of the underworld. A wave of nausea washed Sunny's mind. Arg. A mental scream rang in his head. Luckily, he was prepared for the pain. His armor provided him with a solid defense against soul attacks, too, even ones coming from the mantle itself. The attacking nightmare creatures, on the other hand, had no resistance to it at all. Sunny had only kept the broken oath active for a second before changing the slotted charm back to the blood blossom, but it was enough to break the momentum of the tide of abominations. The hunters staggered, the hound stumbled and slowed down. For a brief moment, the whole mass of monsters seemed disoriented. Sunny used this opportunity well. The dark figure wearing a fearsome mask suddenly appeared in the very middle of the enemies, and before the nightmare creatures could regain their bearing, the great blade of the odachi turned into a whirlwind of darkness, leaving clouds of bloody mist and severed corpses everywhere he went. Sunny had abandoned Saint's grounded style, reduced the weight of the mantle of the underworld to that of a feather, and turned to pure offense, dancing between the enemies like a dark, slaughtering demon. For now, he was still at his peak. But exhaustion was already not too far behind. As he fought, his breath was slowly becoming hoarse and labored. How long has it been? He thought back to what had happened until now. And felt the first hint of desperation. Just a couple of minutes. The whole battle took slightly more than 2 minutes. And he had to continue for at least 11 more. Chapter 490 Breakpoint. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 6 minutes. That was how long Sonny managed to hold on until things really went from bad to terrible. By then, the ground in front of the gate was littered with piles of corpses, their blood flowing down the pavement like a crimson stream. He had lost count of how many dormant abominations he had slain, how many ancient hunters he had sliced apart. Despite how strong and fearsome the primeval wraiths were, their assault had broken against the impenetrable barrier of his blade, his aspect, and his will. Sonny paid a price, though. By now, his muscles were burning, and he had to force the air in and out of his struggling lungs. The mantle of the underworld held, but his body beneath the black stone-like metal was beaten and battered. The armor itself was covered in blood and dented slightly in several places. Those dents did not come from the hunters, though. During the third wave, new nightmare creatures emerged from the darkness of the gate. Among them were larger beasts, more terrifying than the hounds Sonny had been slaughtering. And their masters. The demons of the mysterious barrow were similar to the desiccated huntsmen, but much taller, stronger, and better equipped. They wielded masterfully crafted flint weapons and armors made out of rotten leather and bone, their empty eyes burning with hungry red flames. What's worse, they really knew how to use their stone spears and swords. Met with the strange, ferocious, and deviously lethal battle style of the primeval demons, Sonny was sent for a loop. This was like nothing he had ever experienced before. They fought with the straightforward, yet insidious resolve of cunning apex predators, with the evil will to kill through any means necessary, always following the most efficient and barbarously cruel path to dominance. It should not have worked, but it did. The dents on Sonny's armor could attest to it. Well, he shouldn't have been surprised. If these ancient wraiths came from people similar to his own world's prehistoric humans, then they were the most devastating of predators, ruthless killers on a planetary scale. From what little Sonny knew about history, ancient humans had spread across the whole planet like a plague, eviscerating whole types of living creatures, including all other nascent branches of the human kind, in one fell avalanche. With their flint weapons and the knowledge of fire, they became nothing less than the cause and perpetrators of the sixth mass extinction, equal to the likes of massive asteroids and climate shifts despite their puny size and lifespan. He was kind of starting to miss the Carapace Legion. In any case, Sonny somehow managed to kill these terrifying fighters, a few of them, at least, too. More than that, he reached into the very essence of Shadow Dance and greedily absorbed every nuance of their primeval and ferocious fighting style, and then reflected it back at the waves of nightmare creatures, bringing his already terrifying dance of death to a truly chilling level of brutality. The blood blossom had long ago reached its limit. Minutes passed, and despite the fact that Sonny was battered and growing dangerously tired, his reserves of shadow essence swiftly diminishing, for a few moments, he felt as though he had things under control. That maybe, just maybe, he was going to stand his ground for the whole 13 minutes. And then, he realized that he would not. As the 6th minute came to an end, a furious bellow shook the world, and something massive lunged at him from the darkness of the gate. The barrier of corpses he had built in front of it exploded, and a giant beast, twice as tall as Sonny as weighing at least 20 times more, emerged from it in a cloud of blood and bone fragments, 2 empty eye sockets full of ghostly red flame. Sonny stared at it with wide eyes. The creature resembled a giant bison, its black fur mottled and rotten, a ridge of long, scarlet bone spikes piercing the hide along the spine. The head of the monstrosity was crowned with 2 jagged, blood-red horns. Fallen, that thing is fallen. The bison was also different from the hounds and larger beasts he had been fighting against, since it, just like the ancient hunters, was itself a wraith. A corpse reanimated by the malevolent spirit of red flame. Crap. Sonny hurriedly commanded the Feather of Truth to make his armor as heavy as possible and lowered his stance, knowing full well that he couldn't allow that thing to get past him. In the next moment, 2,000 kilograms of rotting flesh and sharp horns crashed into him at full speed. Cr. For a split second, everything became dark. Then, Sonny found himself bouncing off the asphalt and then rolling across it at a terrible speed, up until the moment a wall of a building stopped him and exploded, shards of cement flying into the air. Not good. Disoriented, he shook his head, feeling drops of blood seep under Weaver's mask, and then used the shadow serpent to help himself stand up. Then, he looked toward the gate through the red mist clouding his sight. The massive wraith was approaching the six terrified awakened. Its speed, however, was slow, and its steps staggered. There was a big hole in its forehead where the thick, adamantine bones of the skull were shattered and cracked, bits of bloody pulp spilling out of it and falling to the ground. Just before the impact, Sonny had brought his armored fist down on it, summoning the Moonlight Shard at the last moment. His plan was to pierce the big bastard's brain, but because of the violent force and momentum of their collision, he ended up doing that, and then punching a hole through the creature's forehead with his spiked gauntlet. Sonny's thoughts were slow and astray, but he was already starting to regain his senses. I have a concussion, I think. Failing to breach the last few meters to the six awakened, the bison stopped and swayed. Its legs suddenly caved, and it toppled over, sending a tremor running through the ground. A flood of abominations was already rushing into the breach it had created, though. Into the empty space where Sonny had been. Still disoriented, Sonny staggered, then raised the soul serpent weakly. Bad. This is really, really bad.